Hello everybody, it's KhalifPVP bringing another Guild Wars 2 video. This time we're going to talk about a Zerg Revenant build for World vs. World. I know I don't really do a lot of World vs. World builds too much, largely because it's really hard to have everybody doing the same thing, especially because of the gear and whatnot. But this is a very easy build to put together in terms of gear, and it is a fantastic build if you're doing a lot of Zerg and a lot of big group World vs. World. So let's get it started with our specializations. We're going to pick up Retribution, Corruption, and Herald. So you do need to have Herald unlocked, largely because all the utilities that you get from the Herald tree. In the Retribution line, we're going to go right down the middle. It's really basic. We're going to pick up Close Quarters, force that strike away from you, deal less damage. Again, since there's a lot of backline, they're gonna deal a little bit less damage to you. Retaliatory Evasion, this gives you 2.25 seconds of retaliation after you dodge. And then finally, the one that you really need to have is Worst in Zone. Chance when struck to cast Rat of the Great Dwarf. And what Rat of the Great Dwarf, what it does is it puts a 5-second buff on you that makes you take 50% less damage, and condition damage is 50% reduced. So if there's a burning that does 100 damage, you'll only take 50. This is a fantastic skill that you really want to have. Unfortunately, the cooldown's a little bit too high for my tastes, but it is a great one to kind of give you a small little buffer, making sure that you don't take too much damage when you're low. Next up is Corruption. Corruption, we're going to pick up, this is the kind of the Condi specialization. In Corruption, we pick up Replenishing Despair, incoming condition, provide a small amount of healing. And you'll see why we pick this up in a little bit. And then for the second one, we pick up Legendary Demon, Banish Enchantments, Spontaneous Destruction, that's what it's called. With a 25-second cooldown, use Banish Enchantments when you strike a foe that has boons equal to or greater than the threshold. It's kind of like a boon strip, really. And then finally, we pick up Pulsating Pestilence, which is invoking a legend, copies conditions to nearby foes. This is, again, you'll see why we use this skill for a reason. Finally, in the Herald specialization, I'm going to go right down the middle once more. We pick up Radiant Revival. This is I think a must pick, largely because it gives you essentially a free heal. What this does is anytime you revive a downed ally, you cast essentially Infused Light, which makes it so that any damage you take while rezzing the guy will become healing. Essentially a free heal. What I like to do is, if somebody's down, go up into the front lines, start healing them, and usually you become the primary target. They're like, oh look, this guy's healing, and you just get a free heal. Fantastic skill. The next one is Shared Empowerment. When you apply a boon to an ally, you put Might on them as well. You're going to be casting a lot of boons when you're in your Herald stance anyway, so it's again a must pick. And then finally, in the last one, you have Soothing Bastion. Christian Hibernation when struck below a health threshold. It's 25% health threshold, and essentially you put a little bubble on yourself that blocks all attacks for about 3 seconds, and that gives you about a 2k heal. So now let's talk about the armor. The armor, at least the sigils and the runes and whatnot, is somewhat unique in the sense that it really depends on who you're going to be running primarily with. I run with Rune of the Mesmer, that gives me power and precision, so a little bit more offensive capabilities, largely because the groups that I run with is going to be largely more defensive than offensive. So they're going to have a lot more Guardians for that block, the frontal Kono block. We're going to have a lot of frontline Ellies with water fields for a lot of blast finishers, so that will heal us up. If you're running with more offensive teams, so maybe you don't have Guardians, you're running with more Necros, for example, you would want to go with a Toughness rune. So it really depends on which, who you're going to run with. If you're not really sure, if you don't have a dedicated team or dedicated group of people that you run with, then I would highly suggest Rune of the Mesmer, because that way at least you'll have a little bit of more offensive capabilities. For our rings, amulets, and whatnot, we have power, toughness, vitality. You can get these from the vendor out in any of the World vs. World maps. So for our two weapons, we have the hammer for our range DPS and a couple of our blast finishers. Actually, two of our blast finishers. And then we have the staff, which is more of our melee, as well as giving us one of the blast finishers for our build as well. Now on to our skills. Our two stances are the legendary dragon stance and the demon stance. There's also one more stance we'll talk about a little bit later. But in the dragon stance, you're going to be largely just doing facet of elements and facet of darkness. Elements for our swiftness, and then darkness for our fury. Elements we're going to get rid of periodically depending on the fight, but we want to maintain darkness as much as possible. One thing I want to mention is that your dragon stance is going to be largely your attack stance, meaning that's going to be largely where you're going to be using a lot of your weapon attacks and weapon skills. Primarily because all the utility skills in the dragon stance does not cost any energy. So it has upkeep ticks, but it doesn't really, like, if you have these two running, you still should have 2 ticks of regeneration available to you. So you're going to be using dragon stance again largely for all your weapon skills, especially your hammer skills like drop the hammer and face smash. Demon stance, on the other hand, is for essentially one skill. It is pain absorption. What pain absorption does is it takes one condition from all nearby allies, well, not all, 5 nearby allies, and puts it to you, and it gives you resistance, which makes conditions completely immune for each condition that you get transferred onto yourself, as well as resistance to your teammates around you as well. So what happens is, a lot of teams have a lot of condi pressure. So using this skill, you'll be able to kind of mitigate that and give resistance to your teammates. Now, remember what I mentioned a little bit earlier? We talked about one of our skills from our build. It is Pulsating Pestilence. And what this does is, all those conditions that you pull onto yourself, as soon as you switch your dragon stance, you're going to transfer all those back to opponents that are around you. So it's a fantastic little double whammy for your opponents. And where they do a ton of condition damage, you pull all that into yourself and you transfer it right back to them. If you don't have your dragon stance on cooldown, you can use renewing waves to kind of somewhat get rid of those conditions. It will remove 2 conditions, and so you kind of get a little bit of more breathing room. One thing I would mention is, before you do renewing wave, I would try to get your health a little bit lower and then use your empowering misery, which does a decent heal plus a higher heal per condition on you. So you can kind of combo that really well with pain absorption. One thing I would mention in Demon Stance is try not to use any costly skills. Energy costly skills, because you really want to have pain absorption running as much as possible. So if you're in Demon Stance, try to restrict yourself to auto attacks or renewing wave. I mean, if it's a dire situation where there's a big bomb coming, you can pull off the warding rift that gives you a nice little block. But I would again, try to limit myself to auto attacks so we can dump off pain absorption. Alright, here's where the wild card comes in. If your team, if the group that you run with is primarily more condi pressure, right? So if you're running with a lot of necros that are conditioned with epi bombing, running legendary dragon stance, which we really use only for the Fast and the Darkness, the Fury, is not going to be as beneficial as not having it, right? So if you're running with a condi build, I would highly recommend switching to dwarf stance. Your skills are going to remain the same, so you're not going to change anything in here, but you're going to be running with dwarven stance. And the reason we run in dwarven stance is you get Rite of the Great Dwarf. This one, as we mentioned earlier from one of our traits. What this does is it gives you a 50% damage reduction and a 50% condition reduction for 5 seconds. It has a pretty decent high cost, 50% energy, but you'll be able to, on engage, like if you know there's a bomb coming, like the enemy is about to jump you, pop this and you give your team a huge advantage. I mean, it's a 50% reduction in damage. That's a fantastic advantage, especially if you're running condition and you don't have a lot of defensive hit players. And this will be a really good solid pick. As I mentioned, largely because your Fury is not going to be giving you any benefit anyway. So folks, that pretty much wraps up our Guild Wars 2 Revenant World vs. World build. Let me know what you guys think about it. It is, in my opinion, it is a great Revenant build for Wars vs. World. Let me know what you guys have come up with, rather if it works out for you, if it doesn't, if there's any improvements. Please feel free to put it in the comment section. If you do like the video, please do like and subscribe, and until next time, it's KhalifPVP.